20 doctors couldn't save a billionaire's life. Machines failed. Specialists were baffled. And just when everyone gave up hope, a quiet housekeeper noticed something no one else did and changed everything. This is the story of how one woman outsmarted 20 of the world's best doctors. 20 doctors and still no cure. Those desperate words echoed through the marble halls of one of the most expensive private hospitals in New York City. A place where billionaires flew in for secret checkups, where politicians came under fake names, where money bought privacy, speed, and the very best care money could provide. And yet, in room 509 of the ICU, none of that mattered. There, lying beneath crisp white sheets, a wealthy middle-aged man with silver hair lies unconscious in a modern hospital bed, surrounded by a group of serious doctors in white coats. At the center, a black female nurse or housekeeper in a gray uniform with a white apron and gloves carefully tends to the patient, injecting medicine into his arm. The doctors stand back, watching with curiosity and surprise, as if realizing she has noticed something they missed. The hospital room is bright, clean, and equipped with monitors for drips and medical equipment. The atmosphere is dramatic and tense, as though a critical discovery is unfolding. A.S. Charles Whitmore, a billionaire real estate mogul whose name was stamped on skyscrapers, hotels, and luxury resorts around the world. He was a man who had everything: private jets, islands in the Caribbean, and the ear of world leaders. But now, stripped of his power, he looked small, pale, and fragile. Machines beeped steadily beside his bed, pumping oxygen, measuring his failing heart. All his money, all his connections, all his power meant nothing as his body grew weaker by the hour. It had all begun suddenly. One moment, Charles was sitting at the head of his boardroom table, scolding executives for a missed deadline. The next, his face turned white, his hand clutched his chest, and he collapsed onto the polished mahogany table. Chaos broke out as assistants screamed, calling 911, while others tried to keep his airway clear. Within minutes, the billionaire was rushed to the hospital with a team of paramedics fighting to keep him stable. And that's when the mystery began. The Whitmore family, his wife, his 2 sons, and his daughter, spared no expense. Specialists were flown in from across the country and even Europe. 20 of the finest doctors gathered around his bed, reviewing charts, studying scans, and whispering theories. The first doctor thought it was cardiac arrest. The second suggested a stroke. The third suspected an infection. But test after test told a different story. Charles's heart looked fine. His brain scans came back normal. His lungs were clear. His blood work, though unusual, gave no definitive answer. And yet, his condition worsened by the hour. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes gasping for air, sometimes mumbling in confusion. His skin grew clammy. His pulse weakened. Every time one doctor prescribed a treatment, another would dismiss it. Every new medication brought no change. Every new scan left them shaking their heads. By the end of the first week, the frustration was visible. Some of the doctors argued in the hallways. Others avoided the press camped outside the hospital gates. The media was hungry for details. Billionaire Charles Whitmore's mysterious illness confounds experts flashed across television screens. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. Nurses whispered nervously. Family members demanded answers. Charles's wife sobbed quietly in the waiting room, clutching her rosary. His sons argued about whether to fly in even more specialists. And his daughter, Olivia, simply sat by his side, holding his frail hand, begging him not to leave her. But the truth was unavoidable. Nothing was working. For all their training, for all their years of experience, the doctors couldn't explain why the world's richest man was slipping away. Each day, Charles's strength faded further. The man who once commanded entire boardrooms with a booming voice could barely whisper. The man who once made billion-dollar deals now struggled to stay awake long enough to say his children's names. It was a cruel irony. Charles had spent his life believing money could solve anything. If he wanted a building, he bought it. If he wanted a politician's support, he funded their campaign. If he wanted the best, he flew it in by private jet. But now, with all the money in the world, he couldn't buy the one thing he needed most, his health. 20 doctors had tried. 20 doctors had failed. And as the second week dragged on, the whispers in the hospital corridors grew darker. If something didn't change soon, Charles Whitmore, the man who thought he was untouchable, would not live to see another month. What nobody realized, however, was that the answer wasn't hidden in his medical charts or locked away in expensive machines. The clue that could save his life was right there in plain sight, waiting to be noticed by the one person nobody expected. Inside the hospital room, the steady beep-beep of the heart monitor filled the air. Tubes snaked from Charles Whitmore's arms. His once powerful frame now looked frail, his skin damp with sweat. Every breath was shallow, as though he were fighting against an invisible weight pressing on his chest. Around the bed, 20 of the world's top doctors stood like generals in a losing war. Their expensive suits and polished shoes clashed with the helpless expressions on their faces. "It's not his heart," one muttered, shaking his head at the latest EKG results. "His lungs are clear," another said, scanning the charts. "But the blood work, it doesn't make sense," a third whispered. Each doctor had an opinion. Each had a theory, but not one had an answer. The Whitmore family was losing patience. His wife, Evelyn, paced the corner of the room, her diamond bracelet jingling angrily every time she folded her arms. His two sons snapped at the doctors, accusing them of incompetence, while his daughter, Olivia, quietly wept by the bedside, clutching her father's hand. "Do something," Evelyn barked. "We've flown in the best of the best, and he's only getting worse. What are we paying you people for?" The doctors exchanged awkward glances. What could they say? Money had brought them here, but money couldn't buy the solution. Meanwhile, outside the hospital walls, chaos erupted. Reporters crowded the gates, microphones and cameras ready. Headlines blared across television screens and online feeds. "Billionaire's mystery illness baffles experts." 20 doctors, no cure. What's killing Charles Whitmore? But inside room 509, away from the shouting and flashing cameras, someone else was watching. Someone nobody noticed. Her name was Eleanor Brooks. Mrs. Brooks was the Whitmore family's housekeeper, a quiet woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair tucked neatly into a bun. She had worked for Charles for over 20 years, silently moving through the Whitmore mansions, cleaning rooms, setting tables, preparing meals. She wasn't rich, she wasn't powerful, but she had spent more time around Charles than most of the doctors in the room combined. She stood in the corner of the hospital, clutching her purse, as invisible as the wallpaper. The family barely acknowledged her presence, and the doctors didn't even notice her. But she noticed everything, and something about this situation didn't sit right with her. As the doctors argued over medical jargon, Eleanor's eyes weren't on the charts or the machines. They were on Charles himself. She studied his face, the way his lips looked slightly swollen, the faint redness creeping along his neck. She noticed the small rash forming on his arms, something no one else seemed to pay attention to. Her brow furrowed. She knew this look. She had seen it before, not in a hospital, but in the Whitmore kitchen. Memories rushed back. A dinner party 2 years ago when Charles had broken out in hives after eating a dessert. A quiet morning when she prepared him tea, only to see him cough and wheeze minutes later. She remembered the doctors brushing it off at the time as minor allergies. But Eleanor knew better. She had been the one scrubbing the dishes, remembering every ingredient, noticing every reaction. Now, standing in the sterile hospital room, she realized what none of the 20 doctors had put together. This wasn't just some mysterious illness. It looked like an allergic reaction. Her heart raced. Could it really be that simple? Could all these brilliant minds have overlooked something so basic? She wanted to speak up, but fear gripped her. Who would listen to a housekeeper? In this room of millionaires and Ivy League doctors, her voice felt small and unimportant. But then she looked at Charles, the man she had served for decades, the man who, for all his flaws and arrogance, had given her steady work and trusted her with his home. He was slipping away, and nobody was saving him. Eleanor clenched her hands together. Maybe the family wouldn't listen. Maybe the doctors would laugh. But she couldn't stay silent any longer. She leaned forward, her voice soft but steady. "Excuse me." The room went silent. Heads turned, brows furrowed. A janitor or housekeeper speaking during a meeting of world-class doctors. It was unheard of. Evelyn shot her an annoyed glance, ready to scold her for interrupting. But Eleanor didn't back down. She took a breath and said, I know what's wrong with him." The doctor stared. The family scoffed. But in that tense moment, the woman who was never supposed to be noticed was about to change everything. Late one night, while the doctors argued endlessly in the hallway, Eleanor slipped quietly into Charles's room. The glow from machines cast pale shadows on his face. His chest rose and fell weakly, his breathing shallow and uneven. She sat down beside him, just as she had countless times in his home after long workdays. With a damp cloth, she dabbed at his forehead, whispering softly, "You're stronger than this, Mr. Whitmore. You've fought through worse." As she leaned closer, something caught her eye. Beneath the fluorescent hospital lighting, it was almost invisible, but Eleanor had sharp eyes, sharpened by decades of noticing small details. A faint reddish rash curled around his neck and dotted the inside of his wrists. Her heart skipped a beat. Eleanor knew that rash. She had seen it before, not in hospitals, but in kitchens, at dinner tables, during quiet mornings when she served Charles his breakfast. Her mind raced back just a week earlier. She remembered it perfectly. Charles had been in a foul mood, demanding something new, something fancier than his usual tea. He'd ordered a rare imported brand from overseas, boasting about how exclusive it was. It had been Eleanor who brewed it for him every morning, carefully following his instructions. The first time, he said it was strong and refreshing. By the third morning, she noticed him scratching at his wrists. He'd laughed it off, grumbling about the cheap laundry detergent irritating his skin. But Eleanor knew better. And now, staring at the same rash spreading under the hospital lights, the pieces clicked together. "It's the tea," she thought. "It has to be." Her pulse quickened. Could it really be so simple? Could 20 doctors, with all their tests and machines, have missed something as basic as an allergy? The next morning, Eleanor gathered her courage. As the doctors shuffled through charts and debated in clinical tones, she approached the lead physician, a tall man with silver hair and a cold, dismissive air. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice steady but cautious. He barely glanced at her. "Not now. This is a critical case." But Eleanor pressed on. "I know I'm not a doctor, but Mr. Whitmore, he started drinking a new kind of tea last week. Right after that, he got those rashes on his wrists. I saw it myself." The doctor frowned, annoyed. "Tea?" he repeated, as if the word were ridiculous. "Madam, this is a multi-system collapse, not a kitchen problem." He turned to walk away, but something in Eleanor's voice stopped him. A quiet certainty, a tone only someone who truly knew the patient could have. "Please," she said firmly, "look at his file. No one has noted his diet. No one has asked about new foods. I've worked for him for 20 years. I know what he eats. And I know this rash didn't start until after that tea." For the first time, the doctor hesitated. He flipped through Charles's thick medical file. Dozens of tests, endless lab results, but not one line about his daily habits or diet. Not one mention of the new tea. The lead physician called in a nurse, instructing her to check the ingredients of the imported blend. Minutes later, the report came back. The tea contained trace amounts of a rare nut extract, something harmless to most people, but potentially lethal to anyone with a sensitivity. The doctor's eyes widened. "Anaphylaxis," he whispered. "We missed it." Suddenly, everything made sense. The mysterious collapse, the strange blood work, the rash no one had bothered to examine closely. Charles hadn't been dying from an unknown disease. He was having a severe allergic reaction, one that had spiraled out of control because no one had asked the simplest question, and it was Eleanor, the housekeeper no one listened to, who had found the answer. The doctors rushed to administer the proper treatment, flushing his system of the allergen and stabilizing his breathing. For the first time in days, Charles's condition showed signs of improvement. His heartbeat grew stronger, his color returned, and the machines around him hummed with hope. The doctors looked at each other in disbelief. 20 of the world's best minds had missed the truth, and it had taken a housekeeper, a woman who simply paid attention, to save the billionaire's life. The doctors ordered immediate tests on the imported tea leaves Eleanor had mentioned. Hours later, the lab results came back, and the truth stunned everyone. The elegant, expensive leaf Charles had been bragging about contained traces of a rare plant toxin. For most people, the toxin was harmless, passing through the body without issue. But for someone with Charles's unique genetic condition, it was deadly. It wasn't deliberate poisoning. No criminal had tried to harm him. It was something far simpler, almost absurd, the wrong man drinking the wrong tea. And yet that simple mistake had nearly cost him his life. The doctors gathered in disbelief, exchanging embarrassed glances. With all their degrees, advanced equipment, and specialized knowledge, not one of them had thought to ask about his diet or daily habits. They had run test after test, searching for complicated answers, when the truth was sitting quietly at the breakfast table all along. The family was stunned. Evelyn, his wife, couldn't stop shaking her head. His children muttered angrily about the wasted millions spent flying in specialists. But in the middle of the shock and frustration, everyone knew the truth. It had been Eleanor who saved him. The quiet woman who dusted his shelves and scrubbed his floors had seen what the world's brightest minds missed. Once the tea was removed from his diet and the proper antidote was administered, Charles's condition improved almost overnight. The rash faded, his color returned, and the monitors showed steady improvement. For the first time in weeks, there was hope. Within days, the billionaire who had been on the brink of death was sitting up in bed, his voice still weak but filled with wonder. The man who once commanded boardrooms and construction sites now sat humbled in a hospital gown, staring at the woman who had saved him. When he learned the truth, that Eleanor, the housekeeper he had often overlooked as just the help, had been the key to his survival, his perspective began to shift. One evening, as the sun dipped low outside his hospital window, Charles called for her. Eleanor entered quietly, smoothing her apron nervously, unsure of what to expect. For a long moment, Charles simply looked at her. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now brimmed with gratitude. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice hoarse but steady, "you saved my life. Not the doctors, not the machines. You." Eleanor lowered her gaze. I noticed things I thought might matter." He shook his head slowly. "No, you did more than that. You saw me when no one else did. You've always seen me." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, murmuring, "It was nothing, sir. Just my duty." But Charles reached out and took her hand. "No," he said firmly. "It was everything." Word spread quickly through the hospital, then to the media outside. The same headlines that once screamed about his mysterious illness now carried a new story. Billionaire saved by his housekeeper's sharp eye. Doctors baffled, housekeeper spots the truth. Reporters clamored to interview her, but Eleanor stayed humble, always replying, "I just did what anyone would have done." But everyone knew the truth. Very few people would have cared enough, or noticed enough, to put the pieces together like she did. When Charles was finally discharged, he made a public statement, his voice steady and emotional. "I have built towers that scrape the skies," he said. "I have commanded wealth beyond imagination. But none of that mattered when my life was slipping away. What saved me wasn't money or power or prestige. What saved me was loyalty. What saved me was Eleanor Brooks." From that day on, Charles treated Eleanor not as a servant, but as family. He gave her a position of honor in his household, increased her salary beyond measure, and, more importantly, gave her the respect she had long deserved. And though Eleanor remained the same humble woman she had always been, the story of her sharp eyes and quiet courage became a powerful reminder to millions. Never underestimate the people around you. Sometimes, the ones the world ignores are the very ones who hold the answers no one else can see. When Charles was finally discharged from the hospital, the scene outside was chaos. Cameras flashed, Microphones shoved forward, and reporters shouted over one another in a frenzy. "Mr. Whitmore, how are you feeling? Who cracked the case of your illness? Was it the European specialist or the Harvard cardiologist?" Everyone expected Charles to name one of the 20 renowned doctors who had flown in from around the world. Everyone expected a polished statement crediting modern medicine and state-of-the-art technology. But instead, Charles stunned them all. He stood tall, still pale but steady, and cleared his throat. His voice was calm, deliberate, and unforgettable. "It wasn't the doctors who saved me," he said, pausing as reporters leaned forward. "It was my housekeeper, Eleanor Brooks. She saw what everyone else missed because she paid attention to me, not just my test results." For a moment, the crowd was silent. Then the air erupted with shouts and questions. "The housekeeper? How did she do it? What did the doctors miss?" But Charles didn't offer further details. He simply nodded once and walked into his waiting car, leaving the world buzzing with curiosity. That evening, the story broke across every major news outlet. Headlines blazed. Billionaire credits Housekeeper for saving his life. The woman with sharper eyes than 20 doctors. Clips of Charles's short statement replayed on TV and went viral online. Social media exploded with praise for Eleanor. People called her a hero, a guardian angel, even a symbol of how ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. But for Charles, it wasn't about the media frenzy. It wasn't about good publicity or damage control. For him, the experience was humbling, life-changing even. For the first time in his life, he realized that money and status didn't guarantee wisdom. The finest hospitals, the most expensive machines, and the brightest minds had all failed him. It had taken the quiet observations of a woman who dusted his shelves and brewed his tea to notice what they could not. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about humility. As for Eleanor, she wanted none of the attention. She didn't do interviews. She didn't chase the spotlight. When reporters knocked on her modest apartment door, she politely declined, saying, "I just did what anyone would have done." But Charles knew the truth. Almost no one would have cared enough or watched closely enough to see what Eleanor had seen. He made sure her loyalty was rewarded, not with empty words, but with lifelong security. She received a generous raise, a pension, and a home in her name. "You've spent your life taking care of me," Charles told her. "Now it's my turn to take care of you." Eleanor remained the same humble, gentle soul she had always been, but the bond between her and Charles changed forever. No longer was she just the help. She was family. And that night, as Charles sat in his study, sipping plain water instead of his exotic teas, he reflected on everything he had been through. He thought of the countless boardrooms where he had commanded respect, the towers he had built, the wealth he had flaunted. None of it had mattered when he was lying in that hospital bed, gasping for breath. What had mattered was Eleanor, the woman who had watched him more closely than anyone else. The woman who had noticed the subtle signs no one else cared about. The woman whose quiet loyalty had saved his life when billions of dollars and 20 doctors could not. Charles leaned back in his chair, humbled, and whispered to himself, "Never underestimate the quiet ones. Sometimes they see what the rest of us are blind to. Because sometimes it only takes one watchful pair of eyes to see what 20 experts can't." Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, and you won't want to miss more stories like this.